Hello, it's Thursday out there in the world. We'll start in the United States of America with the Conference Board Consumer Confidence Index, a Doug Short chart. I've put the little yellow lines in where you can see when the blue lines go down below it, that's consumer confidence, there tends to be a recession. You can see that down below at the bottom where the green GDP turns red. Now at the moment ours is slightly different. Since the Great Recession, when the GDP turned red, the consumer confidence has stayed below the yellow line and crawled out of that over that yellow line, but seems to have turned down again. Now this hasn't made the GDP go down, but all I'm kind of pointing out here is that there hasn't been a superb recovery of any sort, size or description. Things are still very bad and the consumers know that they're really bad. Or things are really bad because the consumer is really bad, because that is so much about what America is. That's that for this. Doug Short, good man. Next, Case-Shiller Housing Index. It's just kept going down. They, for some reason, have decided that this is now officially a double dip. I don't see why this is officially a double dip. I mean, you could read this as it's just had a little hiccup downwards on its recovery upwards. But they call it an official double dip, and of course the consumer confidence will be taking a battering from this as well. Still showing not good in the US. Not where it should be. Not coming out 2007-8 when the recession started is a long time ago now. But things are not right. Right, let's move over to China, because we kind of established earlier this week that China is so important to everybody else in the world. If you're plugged into China, you're doing quite well. If you're not plugged into China, you're doing quite badly. So how's China doing? Because if China falls down and the ones that are doing quite well stop doing quite well and start doing quite badly, along with the ones that are doing quite badly and everyone's doing quite badly, well, that's quite bad. China's economy is starting to slow after 2 years of torrid growth achieved following the global downturn. They put a huge quantity of money in. Now, should I just read all this? No, you'll get the idea. Okay, the Chinese economy is starting to slow. They put all this boost in, this stimulus money, but the central government just told the regional governments, get it done. Right, yeah, I'll leave it there and move on. China's inflation dilemma. The National Development and Reform Commission, these are all agencies of the Chinese government, yesterday decided to increase the electricity tariff for non-domestic uses. Industrial, commercial and agricultural users will have to pay more in 15 provinces, while the rate for residential users remains unchanged. Do you remember we did that thing where they were turning off the electricity because the electricity makers were not making any money because prices were controlled? Well, they'll let them put the price up to industrial and agricultural, but told them to keep the prices low for the private persons. They're making this effort, but it's such a difficult thing. I mean, economies just can't be controlled like that. Moving on to Reuters. China's regulators plan to shift 2 to 3 trillion yuan. That's about $400 billion. That's a lot of money. China's a big place, but $400 billion is a huge amount of money for China. Of debt off local governments, sources said, reducing the risk of a wave of defaults that would threaten the stability of the world's second biggest economy. As part of Beijing's overhaul of the finances of heavily indebted local governments, the central government will pay off some of the loans, and state banks, including some of the big four, will be forced to take some losses on the bad debt, said the sources, both of whom have direct knowledge of the plans. The local governments were always the spenders, and then they were told after the 2008 to go and spend even more, and then they were told to stop spending. But it's very hard to stop spending when you're so used to spending. So they kind of continued to spend, and we can imagine that they haven't always been spending on productive projects, and it's going to cost an awful lot of money. This is basically what you call it, TARP, if you like. It's a huge bailout of investments that have been done in the past, but it's all China, China, China. It's China government, because China government is everything, or the Politburo, or whatever they call themselves. Next, Hindustan Times, where in India manufacturing grows a slow 5.5% in fourth quarter. Now, growth of 5.5 is good, but these are these bricks that are growing at 8, 9, 10%, and India's manufacturing is slowing. This is just painting the picture of the world seems to be slowing. Gavin Davis, Financial Times blog, Bright Boy. At the end of this article, this blog article, thus, the key difference between the springtime dip in growth this year compared to last, this is world dip, is that high oil prices are this time exerting a strong contractionary force on the global economy, which is proving more powerful than many economic forecasters initially calculated. In the developed world, and especially in the US and the UK, households are already burdened with excess debt and seem very reluctant to dip further into their savings in order to keep the rest of their spending unchanged. What savings? Meanwhile, in the emerging world, the rise in oil and food prices have similar effects, which are exacerbated by the policy tightening needed to control inflation. This is just summing up everything that I've been trying to talk about. As explained in the earlier blog, economic fundamentals suggest that oil prices may have trouble maintaining their present levels and seem quite likely to drop by 10 or 20% in the coming quarters. If that proves correct, then the global slowdown, like last year's, will prove temporary. If not, then it is a different ball game entirely. I think that is summing the world up in 2 paragraphs quite neatly. If everyone realizes that the economy isn't going to go forward booming or even crawling forward, and oil prices fall back to say $50 a barrel, then the world economy could be able to crawl forward. But at prices even at $80 a barrel, it's going to struggle. Reuters, as much of a quarter of this in the United States, this is. Reuters, as much of a quarter of the recent decline in the US jobless rate is due to long-term unemployment benefits running out. I'll read that again. As much of a quarter of the recent decline in the US jobless rate is due to long-term unemployment benefits running out, according to the research from the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank. When people exhausted their benefits, the Chicago Fed study found, many find jobs or give up and leave the labor force altogether, both of which contribute to a decline in the unemployment rate. It's kind of an acceptance that so many have been giving up, and this is an acceptance by the Chicago Federal Reserve. When the Fed starts truthing on things like this, could it be the start of their realization that QE3 might be necessary to keep the world afloat? Something is necessary to keep the world afloat, because it doesn't seem to be self-supporting at the moment. Bye.